Hello again. Welcome back to another show. This is a beautiful disaster. I haven't done one of them for a while, but I'm going to talk about John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. This is a film from the mid 90s. It's one of his last really good films. It's like it's kind of like Carpenter had a great run from Dark Star all the way to The Live. He had a really good, strong run of films. Then he had a kind of weird one with Memoirs of the Invisible Man, which is not that good, but it was a professional job. Then he did this one, and then after that, things started to really go off the rails. I mean, he did Village of the Damned, which he was not very proud of. He did not want to do the film; it was a contractual thing, and you can sort of tell like his passion wasn't there. Escape from LA, which I have warm feelings towards, even though it's a very flawed film. Vampires, the same. Ghost of Mars, not a very good film. But that's where we kind of stopped. Apart from the war, they stopped. But basically, after In the Mouth of Madness, In the Mouth of Madness is kind of the cut-off point where you say, okay, this is where his career started to go haywire. But In the Mouth of Madness is the last hurrah, really. It's not perfect, but it's very enjoyable. It's really enjoyable as a film. It's Sam Neill in the lead, and Sam Neill at this point was just coming off of I'm sure he shot this before these films came out, but he was just coming off of like Piano, the big Pandora one of John Carpenter directed, and Jurassic Park, which is a big high grossing film of all time. And then came this one, which didn't do that well because it was a weird John Carpenter horror movie. But he was having a good run. I mean, he also did Event Horizon a few years after that, which was another horror sci-fi movie which went into madness, but it was not anywhere near as good as this one. You know, I'm fond of Event Horizon 2, but it's not a very good film. It's a real guilty pleasure movie. This is one of the movies you watch when you've had a few drinks. So, In the Mouth of Madness is a really well done film. It was written by Michael DeLuca, who's a studio executive, and the script's kind of the weakest point. Not that it's bad, but there's some things that like a more experienced writer would have finessed more in the middle. It feels like there's a good strong beginning, a good strong area at the end where they know they're going towards, but in the middle it's kind of running its wheels off a little bit, just trying to keep you interested. There's some good stuff in there, but it could have been better. But it doesn't matter because the charm of the film keeps it going through its rough spots. It's one of those things you can tell when a film's working is even if it's got a few rough spots, you don't really care. They're still fun for you. So it doesn't really matter. So the idea of it is that Sam Neill plays this investigator, this insurance investigator, who just spots cons, like insurance cons. He's kind of viewed as one of the best viewers of the con, so he just can always spot who's bullshitting. So this gives Sam Neill a lot of fun in the part because normally he's been playing a lot of nice guys in films, and this is one time he got to play a guy who's a bit of a dick and he was obviously really enjoying himself playing this guy who was just nasty sometimes and did some stuff that wasn't very nice. You know, he's chain smoking his way through this whole film, and he's saying things you shouldn't say, and he's one of those people that would annoy you if you're around for too long. But he thinks he's great. So one of the people he's worked with before asked him to go and deal with this claim they've got, which is for Sutter Kane, the famous horror writer who's disappeared. Now, Sutter Kane's a character who's like H.P. Lovecraft meets Stephen King. He's this guy who writes these horror stories, but people who read them get obsessed by them. They become obsessive about the mythos. It's almost like a parody of where we are now with fandom, where people read into stuff and are obsessed by it, wait for the next thing, and it's like, it is a parody of fandom. So we're the Star Wars fans were in the 80s and 90s, where a lot of fandoms are now, where every little thing is worth having a fight about. You know, that's what its fans are like. And the cult of Sutter Kane has become really important. So he has to go investigate this guy. He has to read his books to find out what's going on and try and get an idea of who he is. So he reads a book and he starts to feel a bit weird himself with the books. It's like, he's saying like, yeah, they're trash, but they're well written trash. So this one has a lot of fun about the way normal people see horror movies and horror fiction. It's like the Samuel character has no respect for horror. He does not give a shit. He thinks it's for stupid people. So it's quite refreshing actually, because nowadays anyone who talks about horror has some reverence for it. In this film, he doesn't care less. He just doesn't care about being nice about it. So that's the kind of character we've got, and he has to try and figure out what happened to this guy. And weird things are starting to happen in his head, and he's starting to wonder if he's freaking out in his head a little bit. So Sam Neill's character finds this treasure map thing in the covers of the books. Kind of obvious. And it leads to this place called Hobbs End, because, okay, this is so obviously a media-generated thing. Like, in these mass publications, you cut up something from the covers, you create a map that leads you to Hobbs End. Because this is so obviously something that's, you know, a fiction. So, because I would just go along with them and I'll prove them wrong. So they go and try and find this place called Hobbs End, which is the fictional place where all of the stories take place. Which, even though it should not exist, turns out to exist. And he's saying, well, this is a really good recreation. This is so obviously a con job. It's a publicity stunt. And they're trying to, and his point of view is, they're trying to make a obvious insurance guy who's spots all this stuff, saying no, he's disappeared, this place exists, to be a publicity stunt. He goes, I'm not falling for this. But that makes him blind to the fact that something weird actually is going on. And the film starts to play around with the idea of what's strange and what's not. It becomes much more Lovecraftian of these monsters, people turning into monsters. And this world where the children are becoming infected by the stories of Sutter Kane and becoming evil, and a little old lady turns into an axe murderer. And slowly his sense of reality starts to fall apart. And is he a fictional character by Sutter Kane, or is he a real person? Because he starts off things as a real person, and he starts to get more and more things. He's in the book, and he's really a fictional character. And he goes, what does that mean? And that's the kind of stuff the film's playing with throughout. And that's what's fun about it, is it's playing around with all that stuff. If it is a more experienced writer, some of that stuff could be clearer. Sometimes it's fudged a bit to, I think it makes it vague, when a bit either intentional vagueness or a bit more clarity would have made it scarier. There are elements of that sometimes. But there are some clever stuff as well, where you switch from Sam Neill's your main character to the publisher who's with him, who's the editor, and she's with him, and she's starting to see something's odd. So when they go into the location, the town, it's from her point of view for a while, and then you see her being slowly infected, and you switch back to his point of view. There's clever stuff like that, it keeps it going. And there's also the idea of this guy who thinks he's real. Is he a fiction? Or does the town make a real person read the books and slowly bring themselves into the books in their own mind, where they think themselves a fiction? But then you go to the lead villain, Sutter Kane, who himself thinks he's a fiction for these monsters that are providing the stories to him that he's just writing and selling to the world. So is he just the conduit or a fiction for an unknown horror that we can't face that's going to come out through the stories? An idea of, do these stories create madness, or is it just us wanting to go mad because the world's a horrible place? And there's all these weird ideas floating through it, and the idea of all the horrors within what should be a heavenly suburbia and a heavenly old town of the past, which also has this really creepy church in the middle of it. There's all sorts of ideas floating through it, and it's a very playful film. Like, Carpenter does not take it too seriously, but he's doing a funny film about the end of the world. So he calls this part of his Apocalypse trilogy, which is The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and this, where basically the world ends at the end of each one, where it's like there's no way anyone's surviving this. And it works really well, because this one actually gets you to the end of the world. It's like the world has ended, but there's still jokes going on. And it ends up with Sam Neill laughing his head off at the thought of him being a real person, of him being a serious person, and it's just a joke about your ego and your sense of sanity, the sense of reality. And that's what the film really works on, is this idea of it's all a joke, it's all a parody, it's all weird silliness. And that's how it feels like a real John Carpenter film, where he's taking even though it's based on something that he did not write, he obviously saw this, and I can make this into a John Carpenter film. The same way, like Big Trouble in Little China, even though someone else wrote it, Carpenter got his hands on it, got the tone right, and he figured out how to make this thing work as a John Carpenter film. It's the same thing here. It's like, and you feel this script was like a bit vague, and it was clarified in certain ways. And then he brought Sam Neill in, who really nailed the tone. So the big important thing this is John Carpenter and Sam Neill together, and we create this weird tone, this central character who really feels very much like a John Carpenter character. So even though it's based on a script, it feels like a John Carpenter film through and through. And there's some just wonderful moments in it. John Carpenter, the famous European actor, famous in Europe, not in America, is Sutter Kane. He's having a lot of fun, because he knows just how campy to go and how serious to go. He just knows exactly the tone he needs. Charlton Heston shows up as a publisher. We got a young Hayden Christensen appearing as a paper boy, who appears like after Sam Neill thinks he's escaped from the terrors of Sutter Kane. And so yeah, you escape from the monster, and you find yourself face to face with Darth Vader. That's great. Yeah, but there's lots of people turned up in this film. It's a very enjoyable film. It tickles your brain in all the really fun ways. It's really nice. It's underrated though. I mean, I think a lot of people don't have much respect for it yet. I think it's one of those films that people thought it was a failure now. But others watched it over the years and it's like, oh, this is really interesting. It's a film I always come back to. Every few years it's like, yeah, I want to watch Mouth of Madness again. I've seen it countless times. It's very enjoyable. And even if it's... I think also the fact is, because it doesn't clarify everything, you can use your imagination on it. It knows sometimes vagueness is good. But I think the script could have been slightly better if another rewrite, just to clarify little bits and bobs, or set up the horrors a bit more in the middle, with a bit more clarity to make it creepier. That's the big thing I've got. And in the middle, sometimes it flags a little bit, and it needs a bit more specifics to make the horrors real. I think that's the one area where I think that's where people's interest... I think a lot of people watched it, and then halfway through their interest dropped a little bit and never come back. And for mine, I can see flaws, but I'm still on the ride. And a lot of people really like the film. Even though there's some flaws, they're still on the ride. They still really enjoy where it's going. But that's In the Mouth of Madness. It's a terrific little film. I highly recommend it. It's a pure John Carpenter film. It's one of those underrated ones, so go see it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back next week with some more, but that's me for now. See you later.